afternoon from Nikki and from me from Castle Goring on yet another magnificent sunny summer's afternoon. So without further ado, I am going to plunge right in because I have an awful lot of terrain to cover today. Before anything though, I am going to be remonstrated with. Candy Guinness is one of the many people who said to me, "Love your video, Lady C, but it was Kevin Kostner who starred in and Diana who was said to want to have the role with him in The Bodyguard. And instead it was Whitney Houston who ended up with the role. I just make the point for what it's worth." Oh gosh, love that phrase when you use it. Much love from Michigan and much appreciation from me. Yes, you were one of many people who pointed out to me. I confess, I've never seen The Bodyguard. Also, another confession, terrible to make. To me, Harrison Ford and Kevin Kostner are much of a muchness. Now, while we are on celebratory things, I think I should say that yesterday, Frankenstein, the first edition of 1818, 500 copies printed, written by Mary Shelley, who used to own this castle. It sold for, I think it was £876,000. Just let me check that figure. No, £856,000. The most that a first edition by a female author has ever sold for. Isn't it interesting? Because Mary Shelley sold this castle to Sir George Peachel, who was Queen Victoria's equerry and an ancestor of the person from whom I bought it. I'm very pleased. I think I'm just chuffed, even though it really is nothing to do with me particularly. So now, if I may, we will plunge right in. And we are going to start on a very positive note from Giuffre Skinner, who says, quite rightly, "I believe no one is on an equal footing with Her Majesty. Meghan has delusions of grandeur. It has to be said, until Meghan Markle came along to show not only the Queen, but the rest of the world, the contempt that she has for Her Majesty, because despite her claims to the contrary, the mere fact that she said, well, she doesn't own the word royal, when in fact she did, copyright law, etc. That was just one of the many little giveaways. You know, the President of China, Ceausescu, the dictator from Romania, endless world leaders who were fed and fearsome, including Idi Amin, all had respect for Her Majesty, and none of them has given the message that they regard themselves as not only her equal, but her superior. Mr. Skinner, well said. Lorraine Ford says, the grifters will... Sorry. The grifters will be in New York at Central Park this Saturday the 25th. I hope everyone is there with their booze. Give a boo for every member of their families they've hurt this year. Let us see what happens, but I can tell you something. If they're booed, you can depend on it. The American television stations are going to do precisely what ITV did. They are going to erase the booze. So unless somebody clever records the booze, we might never hear them. Isn't that going to be interesting and really pretty dreadful if they are booed and we don't hear? But I would imagine the whole thing is going to be very tightly controlled and very carefully orchestrated. It is basically a showbiz event, and nobody does showbiz better than the Americans. Nobody. So I would have thought the whole thing is going to be very well orchestrated. And there might even be the obligatory standing ovation, because Meghan and Harry have been declared by Time magazine the most influential of the 100 most influential people on earth. Oh God, you couldn't make it up. Joanne Greener says, bet they're booed in New York on Saturday. What capacity they are there for is a mystery. They have no authority, just a defunct title, and off they go again to lecture others what to do. If there's a word salad speech, I'm gonna play buzzword bingo. Authentic, inclusive, layers of pain, ripple effect, etc., etc. Well, let us wait and see. But whatever happens, it's going to be very entertaining. You know, we need to keep Harry and Meghan in their correct niche. Their niche is entertainment value. They're not to be taken seriously. They are to be laughed at. And let us see what they dish up. And let us see if there's more of the word salad. And they're going to show how much they care. When every day, ordinary people show that they care far more than the lecturers. Lydia Berlow says, Lady C, hello. Is it really true that thanks to the wokists, Harry and Meghan remain wildly popular in the US? How can that be when Americans set such high stakes by the family? Lydia Berlow, I will read one of the many comments from somebody which will partly answer the question, and then I will supplement it. Pamela Crowell says, not popular in the US. No. Even with the woke liberals, we hate them. So I take it she is a woke liberal. My sister tells me, because my sister lives in America, and she tells me that no one that she is aware of, and she keeps her finger on the public pulse. She says, you go to the supermarket, nobody buys the magazines that they feature in, that they've even stopped featuring them by and large on the front pages because they weren't shifting produce. Well, that says it all, but I'm not taking her word for it alone, because I have checked with many other people, and I have checked with you, the viewer. Nobody is interested in Meghan and Harry except the PR crowd and the magazine crowd, who are pushing them for all they're worth. Not even the Democrat Party seems to be bending over backwards, or maybe even coming forwards for them anymore. Poor Megsy baby. Mickey, come and console Motty. Console Motty. Motty's grief-stricken on Meghan's behalf. She may not become President of the United States of America. That means that Camilla and Alexandria are not going to have to go to Cairo and maybe get trip devices to keep Meghan from stealing their crown. Oh, dearie me. Catholic Wench says, it's very ironic that Meghan spent her energy and guile to slither up in the ranks of the world. And when she reached the peak, she found herself in a position where she needed to be genuinely compassionate in order to succeed. Ah ha 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 ha! That must have been a disappointing slap in the face, eh? That is a very interesting observation to make. Meghan faked it until she arrived. And once she arrived, she thought she didn't need to fake it anymore. Isn't that interesting? The very techniques she used to achieve the success that she achieved, she jettisoned and abandoned at the very moment when she needed them. We know that Meghan is somebody who believes that if you don't like the reality, you can simply invent a new one. But what she didn't understand was that it's very easy to fake it on, I would say, a temporary basis. Oh, yes, darling, I think you're so wonderful. But when you are actually a major public figure, unless you are very careful, your true colours are revealed. It's the nature of television. It is the nature of fame today. It's that much more difficult to pretend to be something you're not than it used to be. In days gone by, people had their public face and they had their private face. And their private face didn't need to match up at all with the public face, because there was very little meeting ground between the public face and the private face. That doesn't happen nowadays. And yes, just when Meghan needed to be compassionate and decent and to actually show that she was as wonderful as she was pretending to be, in her arrogance and in her real insanity, because it is insanity, she thought, I don't need to be bothered anymore. I have arrived. Or as my mother used to put it, because my mother could be very witty when she wanted to be. And my mother used to say, oh my dear, they haven't arrived, they have arriven. Which of course was a nonsense word, because there is no such word as arriven. But she was sort of, it was a verbal cocked finger, so to speak. And she'd say, they have not arrived, they have arriven. Well, when Meghan arrived, or maybe we should say when Meghan arose, because we need to remember she's classy with a capital K. What did she do? She dropped the act. But she didn't drop the claims to the act. Isn't that crazy? And it is crazy. So at the very moment that she is continuing with the humanitarian shtick and compassion and all the buzzwords that had got her there when she was enacting them, she didn't bother with the acts of compassion anymore, the acts of decency, the acts of humanitarianism. And she did it flagrantly from the very moment she was married, because she jettisoned her poor father on the grounds that he was trying to preserve his dignity with the press and with a photographer. And she regarded that as a betrayal, but she doesn't regard lying about the royal family and throwing all of them onto the wheels of the bus, the racist bus. That she doesn't regard as anything. And we're not to notice it. Can you imagine? We're not to notice it. We are to act as if none of that is happening. Is that not crazy? I mean, it really is insanity. And we need to remember that some of us actually think Meghan is insane. I'm not going to say whether I think she's insane or not. I leave you to draw your own conclusions. One or two people have come up with very rather witty comments, and I'm going to read one or two of them because they are so funny, and I think we should have fun, don't you? J Freak says, sorry, if common sense was lard, they wouldn't have enough to grease a pan. Sorry, Ricky, come and lick Mummy and calm her down. And Lounge 7296 along these lines says, and this is really terribly droll. Dear Lady Colin Campbell, pardon my comments, but Australians never, big block capitals, want to see eminent in Australia ever again. Meghan was caught out being, wait for it, this is really hysterical. Meghan was caught out being the, sorry, I shouldn't laugh when I say, Meghan was caught out being the bush pig slap, I'm sorry, the bush pig slapper bully that she really is. A bush pig slapper bully. I've never heard that one before, but I can tell you something. It deserves to be embroidered and put on a cushion. Gosh, some of you guys come up with the most extraordinary things. We are really not interested. When they do relaunch, hopefully it is on a boat that sinks near Antarctica and they are frozen and lost forever. We love your insights and amazing teachings on proper conduct and lessons in respect. Love, Brian and Trav, Perth, Western Australia. Brian and Trav, thanks for the laugh. It's hysterical, but I don't know what a bush pig slapper is. But whatever it is, I don't intend to ever become one. Oh God. Harry M says, H&M chose that huge house as their American castle, as though they were setting up their own royal court in Montecchio. I'm not sure that that's how I pronounce it. However, since that's how you pronounce it, I will defer to your superior knowledge on the pronunciation. A total middle finger to the Queen that they would still rule, in quotation marks, as though they were still part of the British monarchy and now have their own American monarchy as well. They were still going to be half in, half out, whether she said so or not. That is a brilliant point, if I may interject. Because Harry and Meghan have ignored the Queen's demands that they be either in or out, and they are half in and half out. It is a brilliant observation. And they act as though they still represent the Commonwealth, quote unquote, and they still have some kind of international influence, as though they never left England, still trying to use the word royal and are still using their titles and demanding their children be in the line of succession. It is just so sick and twisted. Your observations, my dear, have a merit, because there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that Meghan and Harry are trading upon and trying to build themselves up into the royal family of the world resident in America, pushed by American elitists. They are setting themselves up as not only hyper elites, but as the most elite couple on earth. Royal, regal, global, all the L's. Amazing. But the thing is, to what extent are they succeeding? Despite the constant attempts by their promoters, it would appear that they are actually making themselves into mockeries with their hyper-pretensionalism, because they are highly pretentious and they are actually hyper-elites, hyper-pretentious, and rarely swanning around with their new clothes that are made out of hot air. Tina L. Late says, "Leave Prince Andrew alone. The woman was aged 17 the first time they linked up and 18 adult the other times. Most states in the US consider 17 an adult. Andrew may not have known her age. Virginia and Epstein set up Andrew. The coral looks lovely with your skin tone." Thank you, my dear. Thank you. She, of course, is alluding to the previous video. There is no doubt that Virginia Roberts was over 17 years old when she met Jeffrey Epstein, and all her claims to the contrary are bare-faced lies, which have been proven to be bare-faced lies. There is also no question that she was paid for the services she rendered. By her own account, she was paid. I am awfully sorry. I actually think that Virginia Roberts is doing the genuine victims of Jeffrey Epstein a great disservice, but she has to do it, because by her own account, she on a weekly basis was sucking into his sick web 8 to 10 girls on a weekly basis. If Virginia Roberts had not set herself up as a hyper victim, she would be most likely sharing the adjoining cell with Ghislaine Maxwell, who by her own account, she seems to have supplanted in getting girls for Jeffrey Epstein. This is what Virginia Roberts has said repeatedly, sometimes under oath. The age of consent in New York is, if you are 17, you are over the age of consent. In England, the same applies. Virginia Roberts was over the age of consent by her own admission. Therefore, her claims in this lawsuit are spurious, to put it mildly. She has, and her lawyer David Boyes, have very cleverly consolidated two alienable concepts, that is, age of consent and minority. In America, if you are a minor, you are legally a child. However, a child can consent to physical congress and a child can be married. I'm more comfortable using the word minor because minor actually is a more accurate term, but I will go with the nonsensical term that both the Americans and now the British have come up with to substitute a perfectly good term and thereby confuse the issue. Yes, it would appear that they have set up Prince Andrew. It is beyond the realms of possibility or credibility that anybody would be posing for a photograph willingly, the way Prince Andrew did according to Virginia Roberts. Not according to Prince Andrew, according to Virginia Roberts. And she then sends that photograph to her aunt, proudly asserting that she had met Prince Andrew, who she's now accusing of untoward conduct, to put it politely, because we need to remember what forum we're on. We have to be careful not to always be too graphic, otherwise we might fall foul of some of the rather restrictive rules where language is concerned on this forum. Let us see what happens, because the fact of the matter is Virginia Roberts' lawsuit on the face of it is both frivolous and scandalous. Chris Kay says, we had Virginia dumped on us in Australia. She is married with 3 kids. She has spent all her, and it's the absence of colour. I'm not going to use the word, but it's the absence of colour, not the presence of colour. She has spent all her absence of colour male money, and now she needs more. She even tried to implicate Dershowitz, which was a lie that she admitted to. She has lied her whole way through this, and she has no credibility here. Virginia is broke and needs money in big block capitals. Well, I would query that, my dear Chris Kay. I would query that, because she has made millions and intends to make millions more. She has found herself a new business. I don't think she's broke. I think she wants to enlarge her fortune. Not for a minute do I believe her story. She has admitted to lying from the very start. Well, that is absolutely true. She has admitted to lying from the very start. Andrew has never been charged. That again is true. If he is so guilty, they would have laid charges. That again is true. She is playing the victim cards 20 years later. Despicable human. I don't think I need to add very much to that, save to say that if you research the claims that Virginia Giuffre has made, she contradicts herself at every turn. She states that she was a slave when she was being rewarded by her own account to the tune of $15,000 a pop for acts of enslavement. She claims she was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein because she got on his private plane with her parents' consent. She couldn't have traveled without her parents' consent. How is it that she was being, according to her now, the innocent, she was, and her father has previously said, when asked, how is it that Virginia was able to be traveling up and down, he said she was a very good liar. That's what he said. Well, I think all of these are issues that will come back to haunt her. But you know, we live in a world where justice does not always prevail easily or immediately. In days gone by, the privileged were always given the benefit of the doubt, even when they didn't deserve it. Nowadays, the less privileged are not only given the benefit of the doubt, but deified with victim status, even when they are clearly perpetrators, hustlers, operators, and really little better than con artists. I have to tell you, as somebody who is really rather familiar with the law, who helped her brother to set up his law firm, who worked there for several years, at first, the first year totally, and thereafter for the next about 10 years, twice a week. I have to tell you, oh, and by the way, it was primarily a human rights law firm that catered to the poor, the disadvantaged, and the black community in Britain. I am appalled at some of the attitudes now. The pendulum has swung from one way to the other, and each is equally wrong. Lala Holland says, Dear Lady C and Mickey, I'm quite sure Mickey would do a better job sniffing out fact from fiction with many of the topics covered than most other experts or authorities. Why aren't the authorities going after Trump, who allegedly broke off his friendship with Epstein when Epstein allegedly assaulted a female at Mar-a-Lago? That would suggest Trump knew about or had come to know about the sordid side of Epstein. Prince Andrew doesn't seem to be worldly or shrewd. He certainly isn't. Is it not possible that he was unaware of goings-on, just as Meryl Streep was oblivious to the antics of Weinstein? Streep even tried to silence the ME2 at the beginning, just because she was his friend, like Prince Andrew and Epstein, and had just not known about the wicked side of her friend. But she was not later harassed by the FBI or the legal authorities. Not that I am suggesting she should have been. I think these are all excellent points I've got to tell you. Lala Holland, you should be commended for what you have written. Why isn't Trump being asked to contribute? Very good question. Because did he know something? Presumably he did. That anecdote says it all. He must have known something. He should be questioned. So should the other former President Clinton. They should both be questioned. But Prince Andrew is in the line of fire, not Trump or Clinton. Do you begin to see the reason why? It couldn't be simpler. Prince Andrew is a diversion. The American authorities or legal authorities are able to beat the drum and pretend that they are doing something when in fact they're not doing what they should be doing, because there are bigger fish to fry who would hopefully have greater knowledge far closer to home, but they're going after the red herring. And your point about Meryl Streep is also valid. Yes, she was a decent and honourable friend, and she at first defended her friend because she was ignorant of what he had done. Only when it became apparent that she had misread the situation and misread his character did she back off. Has anybody lambasted her? No, they haven't. But they're lambasting because Prince Andrew is a convenient victim. That's why. Philip Butler says, we here in America are not as generous with the Clinton-Epstein connection. The Democrats are in it up to their ears, and you shouldn't take lightly that they are pushing this suit against Prince Andrew. Don't forget the FBI has all of Epstein's documents. That again is a very good point. You know, I was asked a question which I have not read out because it's a redundancy, as to the reason why Prince Andrew had dismissed his legal team. Well, Prince Andrew has not, up to the time of taping, dismissed his legal team. Prince Andrew has been following their advice, and my understanding is they're going to come back punching for all it's worth. Yes, both Clinton and Trump were better friends of Epstein than Prince Andrew. Both of them. So I'm being totally non-partisan. And I also will reiterate what I've said previously, that it is quite possible, maybe even likely, that none of these people knew what Epstein was truly up to. People do not normally go around letting the world know and broadcasting criminal activities or decadent activities. Yeah, they may swagger about being great swordsmen who are very attractive to women and they can get any chick they want, sort of thing. That's braggadocio. That's masculine swagger. That's not the same thing as concerted criminality. Trixie Schneider says, don't forget that Bill Barr had lifelong connections to Epstein, and the great deal that he got when convicted in Florida were Republican. Face it, Epstein was a bipartisan pervert. You don't need to convince me, my dear. I'm already convinced. Epstein was not only a bipartisan pervert. Epstein was also an influence peddler. Epstein didn't care who you were, what your complexion was, political or otherwise, as long as you were a member of the elite. He wanted to have you in his address book, and very often did. He was utterly impartial, utterly. That was one of the keys to his great success. Dottie Kolsch says, as far as the Giuffre Epstein situation goes, why does everyone only mention Bill Clinton? There are photos and videos of Donald Trump and Melania with him. It's not just a Democrat versus Republican thing. Boys will be boys, come from all walks of life and political affiliations. Fair is fair. Do I agree? Yes, I do agree. I do agree. The fact of the matter is, why Bill Clinton is rather more in the frame than Donald Trump is that Donald Trump severed relations with Epstein. And whether this is a fact or not, Donald Trump is given credit for having brought down Epstein. They had a business deal together that went sour, and he evidently helped to bring Epstein down. How true that is, I cannot swear to, because I also know, my researchers tell me, that it is one of the mothers of one of the girls who had $300 that she shouldn't have, who went to the police, and that started the ball rolling. Whether Trump then got involved or not is something I would prefer not to get into, or indeed to know. But I will say there's that version of events. Doesn't really matter whether it is so or not. What matters is that Trump had severed relations with Epstein because he disapproved of Epstein's conduct where girls were concerned. Denise Piper says, Clinton is up to his eyeballs in the Epstein mess. He also partied with Epstein in Palm Beach and went to his island, and his name is on the Lolita Express flight logs numerous times. Clinton has always been a man of questionable reputation. Of course, most of our politicians are or were. Love your videos. That's the explanation as to why Clinton is more in the frame than Epstein, because he continued an association with Epstein. But that doesn't mean that Clinton was guilty of anything but possibly being duped by Epstein. Joanne Seaman says, oh, come on, Bill Clinton was president. The Secret Service had to check it out. They knew about Epstein, and so did a lot of people in that circle. I find it hard to believe that they did not know. Your point is an interesting point. It's a good point, but I suspect it is not actually a sound point. Because just as how in England nobody knew about Jimmy Savile, I have said this before, I did not know about Jeffrey Epstein, and he was a hate figure in our circle. And if we had known about him, I, for one, would have been broadcasting it from the mountaintop. But I didn't, because I didn't know. I knew he was a crook. Whenever his name came up, I made it absolutely clear that I didn't want to have anything to do with him. And if somebody mentioned that he was going to be at something that I was supposed to be at, I either wouldn't go, or then I would make sure that I was never in the same room as Epstein. That's to the extent that I disapproved of Epstein, and I didn't know. And the person whose flat he tried to steal, if she didn't know, I can well believe that Clinton didn't know. I just make that point for what it's worth. L. Jones says, Lady C, with all due respect, you are too smart to just dismiss the Mossad connection just like that. Surely you know that blackmail material on politicians is what all intel organizations around the world seek. And out of all our allies, speaking as an American here, Israel is the nation that spies on us the most. And this is on record and common knowledge this side of the pond. Yes, I do agree. I know that to be a fact. Mossad agents have been caught by us on numerous occasions. Epstein's so-called Lolita Island was a Mossad operation fronted by Epstein and Giuffre. Sorry for wrong spelling. I don't know who that is. I'm sorry. In order to honey trap politicians and other major figures of influence, all for the purpose of serving Israel's interests. Ehud Barak, Mr. Mossad himself, as well as being an ex-Prime Minister of Israel, is already known to have had an exceptionally close relationship with Epstein, according to the Israeli media itself. One doesn't have to read between the lines here. Please, it does not become you when you dismiss the relevance of certain established information, like you do with topics such as Prince Andrew and Israel. You lose intellectual credibility when you do this. I stand corrected. I am happy to have you remonstrate with me on this point. I try not to cast aspersions unless I am pretty sure that they are justified. And I have checked into Epstein's Mossad connections. And yes, it turns out that Epstein was more than likely quite a high-flown Mossad operator. And yes, he was very close to Mr. Barak. Yes. And yes, there is the suspicion that Little St. James was a honey trap, quote-unquote, paradise, where they could obtain compromising information about public figures that they could then possibly leverage down the line in the interests of, shall we say, their beliefs. Let's put it that way. Let's be polite. It gets murkier and murkier by the second. That's all I'll say. And on that note, I think I will say enough for today. I could go on quite a lot because I have been roped in a very peripheral way to the whole business with Prince Andrew. in the most scandalous and unethical and disgusting manner, which I will get to on another occasion. Suffice it to say that there are dark forces at play here, and this is an extremely layered situation. And let's see how it plays out, because this really has the potential to be one of the hugest incidents, to be polite about it all, that we will experience, if not in our lifetime, certainly within this decade. This is really high-powered, big-time stuff. And to just wrap this up, I would really like to make one extremely important point. Virginia Giuffre was a very experienced 17-year-old girl, by her own account, who had lived with several men, older men. Now, I am not saying that many of Epstein's victims were not innocents. The evidence that I have seen regarding Virginia Roberts, as she was, tells me that she was no sweet little innocent. And to wrap this up, I think I should make the point that if Prince Andrew did indeed have, shall we say, personal exchanges with Virginia Roberts, which he has categorically denied, that is not exactly creditable. However, 40-year-old men all the time avail themselves of the services of young professionals. Virginia Roberts, by her own admission, was a professional. She was being financially rewarded, and I'm sorry, there is no way that I think that any 17-year-old doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. And if you don't know it by the time you're 17, with due respect, I think it is your failing. If indeed she is speaking the truth, Prince Andrew comes out of this with very little credit. But whether she is speaking the truth or he is speaking the truth, she comes out of it with no credit whatsoever. I hope I have made my position clear. I have a great deal of sympathy for young women who are taken advantage of. I am afraid my sympathies do not extend to adventuresses of any age. And I know that when I was 17, I knew the difference between right and wrong. And I have no doubt that if she didn't then, she doesn't now. And no matter what, I would never have been induced to sell my body. And I'm awfully sorry. There's no way of dressing it up. By her own admission, she was being rewarded handsomely for the use of her body. I have sympathy for Virginia Roberts, but I think she needs to go back to school and learn a few lessons in ethics and morality, chief of which is when you have made a mistake, you do not then, having profited from it handsomely, try to profit from it in double and triple recovery. I'm sorry if I sound harsh, but you know, to be a truly moral person, you have to be harsh with yourself. When I was 17 years old, I used to take huge amounts of cash, smuggle it out of Jamaica to the United States for friends of my parents. I desperately needed money to sort out my deformity. It didn't even occur to me once that there was all that money. I could just help myself to it. Never occurred to me. If I ought to say that I knew if my problem didn't get sorted out, that I would ultimately commit suicide. But it didn't occur to me to steal the money, even though the price I would have been paying was the loss of my life. So let me put it this way. Life is tough. And I don't think it seems to me to have been very tough for Virginia Roberts at the age of 17. Because she was making, by her own admission, tens of thousands of dollars a pop. How does that make her a victim of anything but a bad upbringing, if indeed she had a bad upbringing? Because she might not have had a bad upbringing. She might have just been a bad egg from the word go. But if she wasn't a bad egg and she had a bad upbringing, one can cut her some slack. But not to the extent of people paying with the remainder of their lives and for them to be put into disgrace or imprisoned because she wants to make some more money and set herself up as a victim. Now, what about all those girls, the 8 and 10 girls a week that she was roping in? Where are all of them? Why isn't she being held accountable for that? I just ask those questions for what they're worth. And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter that he's Prince Andrew. What matters is she, by her own admission, was paid. She was over the age of consent. It seems to me she simply found another way of milking that cow. The situation is deeply distressing and deeply sordid. And I have to tell you, I do not like having to address it. And I do not like the fact that I have been roped into it, even if only peripherally, which I was by the Daily Mirror newspaper. I find the whole thing defiling, and I would much rather I had played no part in it whatsoever. However, right is right and wrong is wrong, and two wrongs do not make a right. And the fact that Virginia Roberts has found a way of making herself millions, setting herself up as a victim, when by her own account she was paid for her activities. I don't know on which planet people are living if they think that at 17 years old you don't know the difference between right and wrong. Because if you don't, it means you are a sociopath and you never will know the difference between right and wrong. Everybody else knows the difference between right and wrong by the time they're 17. I would say when they're much younger. You only need to look at children to see they have an innate sense of justice. And if they don't, it's because they have a personality defect. And on that note, I will say, thank you for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and please keep the questions coming in. And I'm sorry if I can't stretch to a smile today, but really, I find this whole business defiling. Thanks and goodbye.